What's the scariest thing you've heard while pretending to be asleep? User under the nickname Night Whisper. I was in high school when I first learned to fake sleep. My parents fought constantly. Their voices reverberated through thin walls in the late hours. So I would lie in bed, unmoving, eyes shut, straining to catch every muffled word. One night, I heard my father spit threats that made my stomach clench. He told my mother he would burn the house down if she ever tried to leave him. I remember the hush that followed, my mother's stifled sobs, and the scrape of a chair on the kitchen floor. My heart pounded so loudly I thought they would hear it. From that day on, I pretended to sleep whenever tension rose, half hoping it would protect me, half curious about the next vile secret that might spill. I visited my cousins for a sleepover. The house was full of laughter that day, but come nighttime we were meant to share a bedroom. Around midnight, I woke to soft footsteps. I glimpsed my cousin's older brother slipping into the room. He leaned over my cousin's sleeping bag, rummaged through it. I froze. Then I heard him whisper to himself, cursing about stolen pills, mumbling about how he needed to hide them before someone noticed. My mind reeled, but I remained utterly still, eyes closed in a mock dream. He pawed through my cousin's pockets, found something, exhaled relief. I felt an urge to speak up, but fear rooted me in place. Then he scuttled out. The next morning, I asked my cousin if he noticed anything missing. He told me all his pain meds from a recent surgery had vanished. I lied, said I knew nothing. The guilt ate at me, but that experience taught me that faking sleep can reveal things you wish you never heard, forging a silent complicity in secrets that wrap around you like cold chains. User under the nickname Emberdrift. In college, I shared a dorm room with a roommate who had a boyfriend that visited too often. I usually tried to be polite, giving them space. But one night I was exhausted, so I pretended to sleep while he showed up. They whispered for a bit, then it got heated. I wanted to groan, but I kept still, hoping they'd tone it down. They paused, then started arguing in hushed, angry voices. My roommate hissed that she suspected him of cheating, that she found suspicious numbers on his phone. He laughed derisively, saying it was none of her business. She threatened to sabotage his entire academic standing if he didn't admit the truth, boasting she had dirt on him, something involving forged assignments. That's when he uttered the chilling line, "If you try to wreck my life, I'll make you regret you were ever born." I was lying there, my breathing shallow, heart hammering. The hatred in his voice was far more frightening than any typical lover's quarrel. My roommate stifled a sob. He stormed out, slamming the door. I remained frozen. My roommate assumed I slept through everything, but the next morning I watched her face, searching for hints of a plan or a bruise left by those venomous words. She said nothing. I never confronted her, never told her I heard everything. But from then on, I feared for her. The tension lingered, thick as smoke. I realized how a soft hush in the dark can cradle threats that would never see daylight, if only we keep our eyes shut. That memory haunts me because I wonder if my roommate was truly safe. I had never thought a calm face could conceal such wrath. User under the nickname Pine Mist. I used to babysit for a relative who worked late. Their home was older, creaking floors and a general sense of stale air. Late at night, the child would fall asleep on the couch, and I'd wait until the parents returned. One evening, I decided to crash on the couch after the mother came home, because it was too late to drive back. She said that was fine, tossed me a blanket. I lay there in the dark, hearing the mother rummage in the kitchen, then talking low on the phone. My eyes stayed shut. She began to speak words that made my skin prickle. She mentioned an illicit affair, describing in detail how she was planning to leave her spouse as soon as she drained his bank account. Her voice was cold, purposeful. She revealed how she manipulated him, forging signatures, calling him gullible. I recognized the father's name, a gentleman who doted on her and their child. I recall her laughter, a quiet, hollow laugh, saying she couldn't wait to watch him beg once he discovered every penny was gone. Then she ended the call. Footsteps approached the living room. I forced myself to remain still, feigning deep slumber. My heart hammered. Next morning, she acted sweet, offering me pancakes. I felt nauseated, knowing the darkness she planned behind that pleasant face. I never told anyone, though it tortured my conscience. Eventually, I heard they divorced under nasty circumstances. I suspect she carried out her scheme. The father ended up bankrupt. Sometimes, I regret not warning him. But I was just a babysitter who overheard the vile truth because I pretended to be asleep. User under the nickname Dust Halo. My father ran a small farm in a sleepy rural area. We rarely locked doors. One night, relatives visited, so the house was crowded. I slept in the living room on a makeshift bed. Sometime past midnight, I heard hushed voices. It was my father and uncle, presumably not wanting to wake me. They began discussing a family land dispute involving the newly discovered potential for oil under part of our farmland. My father confided he was so desperate for money. He was thinking of forging documents to cut out certain cousins from the inheritance if the oil turned real. My uncle encouraged him, said the others were worthless. Together, they outlined steps to falsify signatures, bribe a local official, secure the rights solely for themselves. My heart pounded. I never expected such underhanded cunning from my father, a man who always preached honesty. I lay there, pulse racing, unable to breathe too loudly. After a while, they left, believing me asleep. In the morning, everything was normal. Dad ruffled my hair, Uncle teased me about chores. But I could hardly meet their eyes, feeling sick at their plan. Over the following weeks, I saw them make phone calls, hold secret chats. Eventually, a blow-up in the family happened, with relatives accusing Dad of forging papers. I knew exactly how it started, all because I overheard them that night. My illusions about Dad's integrity collapsed. But I never admitted I knew, nor that I'd pretended to sleep. The heartbreak was real. Sometimes, the darkest truths are ones overheard in supposed slumber, truths that corrode your trust in those you love. User under the nickname Ember Halo. I was traveling with a friend, sharing a cheap motel room to save costs. We were close buddies, or so I believed. That night, I dozed off but half woke at the sound of him talking on the phone, presumably thinking I was asleep. He admitted to someone on the line that he had stolen my credit card info, intending to buy items once we got home, planning to blame me for losing the card. My stomach twisted in shock. This was my friend, the guy I'd known for years. Yet here he was, describing me as gullible, easy to manipulate. He laughed, said I'd never suspect him, because I'd be too embarrassed, or I'd assume I'd dropped my card somewhere. I froze, mind racing. If I leapt up then, I'd create a confrontation in the middle of nowhere. So I listened, heart hammering. He ended the call, let out a satisfied sigh, then fell asleep. Next morning, I acted normal, but my chest burned with betrayal. I stayed watchful. When we returned home, I canceled my cards, lied to him that the bank had flagged suspicious activity. He looked rattled but pretended not to care. I never confronted him openly. Instead, I quietly cut him out of my life. That was the worst conversation I overheard while feigning slumber, because it spelled the end of a friendship I had cherished. The heartbreak that someone so close could plot theft behind my back remains unforgettable. User under the nickname Solarune. I was in college, part of a theater group. We often crashed on each other's floors after late-night rehearsals. One weekend, we had a group trip and shared a big cabin. Exhausted from hours of practice, I lay in my sleeping bag in the main room while others joked around. Eventually, the chatter died, or so I thought, but I stayed awake, eyes closed. Then, two of my groupmates started whispering, not realizing I was only a few feet away. They ridiculed me viciously, mocking my body, my stutter, the way I tried so hard to be accepted. They laughed, calling me a pathetic clown who believed we were all friends. My cheeks burned with shame and tears threatened to well up. I forced my breathing to remain slow, feigning deep sleep. Their cruelty stung. One even said he would sabotage my role in the next performance to keep me off stage. My heart ached. I had admired them, thought we shared camaraderie. At dawn, they greeted me cheerfully, as though none of those venomous words had been said. I plastered a smile, but inside, I was crushed. That is the day I learned the ugliest truths can slip out when people think you are asleep. I never confronted them. Instead, I poured my sorrow into my performance, eventually outshining them in the show. Yet each time they offered a grin or pat on the back, I heard their mocking voices in my memory, a permanent scar. User under the nickname Jade Plains. I volunteered at a summer camp in my late teens. One night, I felt sick, so I crashed early in the staff cabin. The other counselors came in later, presumably thinking I was knocked out from medication. In the darkness, they chatted about pranks, gossip, typical banter, until the conversation shifted. Two of them started discussing a younger camper they found particularly annoying, a shy boy who cried often. Then one counselor revealed a horrifying plan to bully him, forcing him into the woods at night to scare him senseless. Another counselor egged him on, laughing about how they might stage a fake wild animal attack. My stomach lurched. This was not mere teasing. It sounded borderline abusive. I remained silent, my mind reeling. The next morning, they acted cheerful at breakfast, high-fiving campers. I felt a knot of dread. I ended up alerting the camp director anonymously, leaving a note. The plan was thwarted, though they never found out how. That was when I realized even people tasked with caring for kids could harbor malicious intentions behind friendly smiles. Overhearing them in the dark forced me to see the cold truth. If I had not pretended to sleep, the camper might have suffered a traumatic experience. User under the nickname Gloomwings. I worked a low-paying job, renting a cramped apartment with my significant other. One weekend, my sister visited. Space was tight, so we all slept in the same living room. Late at night, I half woke to hear my sister quietly speaking to my partner. She thought I was asleep. She confessed romantic feelings for him, hinting at an affair they could have behind my back. My heart pounded so hard I worried they'd hear. My partner paused, then said nothing. My sister whispered that she knew I was naive, that I'd never suspect a thing, that if he wanted, they'd find ways to meet in secret. My partner finally rejected her, telling her she was crossing a line. She insisted he keep quiet about the conversation, or she'd stir drama, claiming he forced himself on her. The horror washed over me. I had never imagined such betrayal. My partner stormed out to the balcony, leaving her alone. I lay there paralyzed, uncertain how to confront this heartbreak. By morning, I faked ignorance, but my sister acted normal, cheerful. My partner looked grim. Weeks later, he admitted what happened. I confessed I'd heard it all. We both cut ties with her. But that night remains a nightmare in my memory. The sense of betrayal within my own family, overheard while lying motionless under a blanket. User under the nickname Lunar Trace. When I was a child, maybe 8 years old, I occasionally crawled into my parents' bed if I had a bad dream. One evening I did so, but I was not truly asleep. They assumed I was out cold. I heard them whisper about a plan to separate. My mother said she had enough of father's debts. Father insisted she had drained their finances. The real heartbreak was the talk about me, how they worried I'd be caught in the crossfire. Father said he might not fight for custody. Mother sobbed, saying she felt trapped. I clung to her side, tears forming behind my shut eyes. Eventually, they calmed, hugging each other, deciding they'd wait to see if they could salvage the marriage. But the knowledge that they were on the brink of splitting left me numb. I never told them I heard. They put on smiles in the daytime, but I carried that weight. A year later, they did divorce, and I was not surprised. The conversation I overheard that night was a quiet tragedy. It taught me that sometimes, by pretending to sleep, you stumble upon adult truths your young heart is not ready to bear. User under the nickname Ember Dawn. I was on a trip with close friends sharing a hotel suite. After a long day, I pretended to sleep early, hoping to recover from a migraine. The rest of them chatted in the living area. Their conversation turned to me. They started dissecting my personality, calling me clingy, oversensitive. One even joked that I'd never achieve my dreams because I lacked discipline. I felt my chest tighten, tears forming as I lay under the covers, breathing slowly to maintain the illusion. Another friend chimed in, sounding somewhat sympathetic, but ended up echoing the same criticisms in gentler words. It stung worse than direct insults because these were people I considered family. In the morning, they acted normal, inviting me to breakfast. I forced a smile, the ache in my chest unwavering. That day, I realized I had placed too much trust in them. Over time, we drifted apart, me never quite forgetting the sting of their private judgments. Pretending to be asleep revealed how cruel or dismissive they could be when they thought I was not listening. User under the nickname Frost Echo. I was once stationed in a remote research facility studying weather patterns. The accommodations were cramped, bunk beds in a single large dorm. One night, after lights out, I stayed awake, staring at the rafters, when two colleagues a few bunks over started whispering about falsifying some crucial data. They talked about tampering with the climate sensors, forging results that would favor a sponsor's desired outcome. My heart pounded. That data was meant for official scientific reports. They joked about the bonus they'd receive. They rationalized it by saying no one checks thoroughly, and the sponsor wanted to push a certain narrative about minimal climate impact. I was stunned. This was not just a moral breach but a betrayal of science itself. Lying there, I realized if I confronted them, I'd likely be ostracized or fired, given the sponsor's involvement. The next day, they acted friendly, even offered me coffee. I forced a polite nod. Deep in my gut, I felt disgust. Eventually, I requested a transfer, silently resigning myself to the fact that big money often warps research integrity. That knowledge still chills me, how easily scientists can undermine truth for profit. Revealed by a midnight whisper they assumed no one awake could hear. User under the nickname Stormhaven. We had a big family reunion at my grandparents' house. Everyone bunked in various rooms. The older relatives stayed up drinking, telling stories in the living room. I dozed on the couch, half asleep. My eyes were closed, but I listened as they reminisced about old times. Then my uncle started talking about a dark secret. An incident decades ago when my father and some relatives covered up a tragic accident that led to someone's death. They decided to hide the body and pretend it was a missing person scenario. I felt my blood run cold. I had never heard any rumor of such a thing. My uncle detailed how they put the body in an unused well, eventually sealing it. He laughed bitterly, saying no wonder he had nightmares. My father apparently burned the victim's belongings to destroy evidence. I lay still, trembling. The conversation drifted as the older relatives swore each other to silence. The next day, they were hungover and normal, none suspecting I heard. That knowledge shattered me. My father had never shown a hint of guilt around me, but I now saw him differently, weighed down by a monstrous secret. Pretending to be asleep uncovered a skeleton in the family's closet so horrifying, I still cannot look my father in the eye the same way. User under the nickname Lumineco. During my junior year of college, I joined a sorority. The house was loud, stuffed with chatter. One night, I had a friend crash in my room. We used bunk beds. I pretended to sleep because I felt uneasy about some drama in the house. Sure enough, after midnight, my friend's phone buzzed. She spoke in whispers, presumably thinking I was out cold. She plotted with another sorority member to frame me for a violation that could get me expelled from the organization. They believed I was a threat to their leadership ambitions. My jaw clenched, tears pricked my eyes. They planned to plant contraband in my drawer, then tip off campus security, forging text messages. I felt rage and betrayal. By morning, I had a plan. I quietly removed any suspicious items from my belongings, kept my phone locked, told an older friend for backup. Their scheme backfired. The contraband ended up discovered in the same friend's locker, leading to her downfall. She never realized I heard the entire blueprint while lying silently in the bunk bed, heart hammering with fury. That moment taught me that sometimes faking sleep can be your best defense, letting you discover who aims to stab you in the back. User under the nickname Silver Comet. I am from a large extended family. One winter, we shared a cabin for the holidays. Late at night, the older cousins played card games at the dining table. I lay on the couch feigning sleep. They chatted about personal stuff. Then it drifted to me. They mocked my mental health struggles, laughing that I was probably faking depression for attention. One cousin said she had seen me cry in the bathroom once, calling me pathetic. Another said I was just seeking pity. Their cruelty felt like a punch to the gut. I forced my breathing to remain steady, tears gathering at the corners of my eyes. I had always thought them supportive. The next day, they smiled at me as if we were close. That false warmth made me sick. I realized the mask people wear in daylight can shatter once they think you cannot hear. Their words still echo in my mind sometimes. I left the cabin early, feigning a headache. Ever since, I struggle to trust them. All because I overheard how they truly felt about my pain. User under the nickname Redwood Path. I was a rookie firefighter who sometimes bunked in the station overnight. The station had a large dorm with bunks, minimal privacy. One evening, a few senior firefighters stayed up talking about a tragic incident that happened years before I joined. I listened with eyes closed, letting them assume I slept. They revealed the chief had made a fatal mistake during a blaze, ignoring a standard safety protocol. That error led to the death of a fellow firefighter. Instead of reporting it, they all covered for the chief, forging the after-action report, claiming it was an unavoidable accident. My stomach lurched. This was the man who now commanded me. The hush in their voices was thick with regret. One said he still had nightmares about the friend they lost. Another said they felt guilty every time the widow came by the station, praising the chief for doing all he could. I stayed silent. The next morning, the chief greeted me, cheerful as ever. I looked at him differently, recalling the hush of that nighttime confession. We place our lives in each other's hands. Yet these men had concealed a lethal mistake. Over the years, that knowledge gnawed at me. I realized not all brotherhood bonds are formed by truth. Some are forged in secrets that weigh on their souls. User under the nickname Indigo Quiet. I was about 12 when I realized I could learn secrets by lying still in my bed, eyes closed, breathing measured. One night, my aunt and uncle slept over at our house, staying in the living room. Late at night, I heard them shuffling around, so I pretended to be asleep on the couch. They whispered about a hidden stash of money they had taken from my grandparents, bragging that no one would ever find out. My uncle chuckled, saying he had manipulated the family finances for years, forging documents so my grandparents would never suspect. My aunt giggled, calling them naive. I remember the pang of betrayal in my chest, the echo of their laughter. In the morning, they acted sweet, bringing pastries, hugging everyone. I stayed quiet, haunted by the knowledge that they were thieves who exploited their own parents. That was my first taste of adult deceit. I never told anyone, partly because I feared no one would believe me, or that I'd spark a massive family rift. But from that day, I always felt sick around them, recalling how, in the hush of the night, they boasted about stealing from the very people who raised them. User under the nickname Ember Twilight. During high school, my best friend and I shared a hotel room for a weekend field trip. I woke up one night, hearing her talk on the phone. She must have thought I was asleep. She was sobbing quietly, telling the person on the other end that she hated me, that she felt trapped in our friendship, that she only stuck around to copy my homework. My eyes stung with tears. She claimed she found me annoying, said she planned to ditch me once she got good grades. I lay there, heart pounding. I had never imagined she viewed me as a tool, not a friend. Eventually, she ended the call and climbed into bed. I fought to keep my breathing steady, tears threatening to escape. The next day, she was all smiles, linking arms with me, as if nothing happened. The pain twisted inside me, but I pretended ignorance. Once we got back home, I slowly distanced myself. She never realized I discovered her true feelings while I lay there, feigning peaceful sleep. The heartbreak reminded me that sometimes the people closest to you hide contempt behind forced camaraderie. User under the nickname Azure Drift. I used to date someone who traveled a lot, so I cherished any night he slept next to me. One evening, I was in bed earlier than him, drifting in and out. He entered the bedroom, sat on the edge, and made a phone call. Thinking I was out cold, he spoke in a subdued tone. He was telling someone that he never intended to stay with me long-term, that he found me too plain, not ambitious enough. He laughed, calling me a temporary fix for his loneliness, planning to leave once he found someone better. My stomach lurched at his dismissive words. My eyes remained shut, tears seeping into my pillow. I felt a searing wave of anger, but also heartbreak that the man I loved viewed me as disposable. He concluded the call, slipped under the covers, and placed an arm around me. I had to repress the urge to recoil. The next day, I acted normal, carefully plotting my exit from the relationship. I never confronted him directly. I simply ended it a week later, citing irreconcilable differences. He acted stunned, but deep inside I carried that knowledge from his phone call. Faking sleep that night was the painful gateway to a truth that freed me from his manipulations. User under the nickname Marble Pulse. A cousin and I went on a backpacking trip through Europe. We stayed in cheap hostels. One night, in a cramped 6-bed dorm, everyone else was out partying except me, so I turned in early. Sometime around midnight, my cousin returned with 2 strangers, obviously intoxicated. Unaware I was half awake. They began rummaging through my backpack, not to steal but to mock my personal items, laughing at how cheap my gear was, how pathetic my travel style seemed. My cousin even joked that I'd never truly fit in, that I was too naive and timid. The strangers cracked up, echoing the insult. I lay there, cheeks burning with shame. They found my journal, flipping through pages, reading lines in mocking tones. My cousin giggled. I felt tears forming. I never confronted him, but it shattered my trust. The next morning, he joked about my journal in a subtle jab, as if referencing an inside secret. I pretended not to notice, though inside, I was torn. That trip never recovered the warm closeness we once shared. Overhearing them degrade me, while they believed I slept, left a scar that changed our relationship forever. User under the nickname Willow Spark. I once lived with 2 roommates in a tiny apartment. We were friends, or so I believed. Late one evening, I dozed on the sofa while they chatted in the kitchen, apparently thinking I was out cold. They started ridiculing me about my weight, my clothes, my social awkwardness, trading cruel remarks. One said she hated how I'd cling to them at parties, embarrassing them. Another chimed in that I was an easy target for jokes. My eyes stayed firmly shut, tears slipping down my cheeks. It dawned on me that these people I'd confided in were not my allies. They reveled in humiliating me behind my back. The next day, they asked if I slept well. I plastered a fake smile, but inside, every word they uttered replayed in my mind. Eventually, I moved out, leaving a short note that I was transferring for personal reasons. Even now, I recall that hush of the living room while I pretended to dream, hearing them tear me apart. It taught me the cold reality that some betrayals lurk in the everyday warmth of shared spaces. User under the nickname Ion Flash. My mother and stepfather often held late gatherings with friends in our living room. When I was little, I'd sometimes pretend to be asleep on a recliner so I could eavesdrop. Most nights, it was dull adult chatter. Then, one evening, they started talking about shady deals with local criminals, referencing money laundering. My stepfather bragged about forging official documents, using my mother's name as a front. I recall my mother sounding anxious, but too complicit to object. She muttered that they had to be careful or they'd wind up in prison. My stepfather just laughed, calling her paranoid. My mind reeled. I was only 10 but comprehended enough to realize they were doing something illegal. I stayed motionless, afraid they'd see me awake. Over time, I noticed them buying expensive items, hosting lavish dinners. I realized the hush money from their scheme financed it all. When I turned 18, I moved out as soon as possible, unwilling to witness more. They never suspected I had gleaned their secret from that single night. Even now, I'm not sure if they faced consequences, but the sense of dread from that overheard conversation still clings to me like a cold sweat. User under the nickname Novark. In my mid-20s, I shared a hotel room with a coworker during a conference. Late at night, I was half asleep when he received a phone call. Thinking me unconscious, he spoke about sabotaging our department lead by leaking certain emails that would frame her for misconduct. He wanted her fired so he could angle for her job. My jaw tightened with shock. He detailed exactly how he would manipulate attachments, forging her digital signature. My heart hammered. I had always viewed him as a friendly colleague, but now I heard cunning malice. He ended the call with a triumphant chuckle. I lay there, eyes squeezed shut, mind racing about how to prevent it. Over the next few weeks, I discreetly warned the department lead that suspicious activity might target her. I never revealed how I knew. She took precautions, changed passwords, secured her systems. In the end, his plot failed, and he was quietly fired for unrelated misconduct. He never realized I had orchestrated a counter. That night, pretending to be asleep had given me a front-row seat to corporate sabotage, all told in a smug whisper, ironically trusting in my slumber. User under the nickname Dark Fathom. I was a newlywed, traveling with my spouse to visit his family. We spent a weekend in his childhood home, sharing a guest room. One night, after I had apparently fallen asleep, my spouse left the room to talk with his mother. Their voices carried through the thin door. He revealed regrets about our marriage, telling her he felt trapped, that he still had feelings for an old flame. My mother-in-law hushed him, urging him not to say such things aloud. He insisted he might end things soon if his old flame reciprocated. My world tilted. I had believed we were happy. My chest constricted, tears soaking the pillow. I never confronted him that night. In the morning, he acted normal. I carried that heartbreak for months, anticipating a confession or a sudden split. It never came. To this day, we remain married, though my trust is shaken. He never found the courage to leave, or maybe he changed his mind. But I live with the knowledge that I am second choice in his mind, gleaned from that hushed late-night confession. Pretending to be asleep can reveal truths that irrevocably tarnish your illusions, and I bear that quietly. User under the nickname Jade Horizon. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, I learned to lie perfectly still at night if I heard suspicious noises. At 15, I fell asleep on the couch, only to stir as my older brother and a friend tiptoed in. They started talking in grim voices about a robbery they had committed earlier that night, how they'd threatened a store clerk with a gun. My brother bragged about how he forced the clerk to empty the register, then pistol-whipped him. Shock reverberated through me. The brother I admired had turned violent. I kept my eyes shut, praying he wouldn't notice my trembling. He boasted about the haul, the adrenaline rush of intimidation. He said they'd do it again if they needed quick cash. I felt nauseated. My love for him clashed with disgust at his cruelty. By morning, he was the affectionate sibling again, messing up my hair, offering me cereal. I forced a smile, haunted by his bragging in the dark. Over the years, that memory never faded. I saw him sink deeper into criminal acts, yet I never overcame the fear triggered by that overheard confession. User under the nickname Oceanbreeze. My grandmother was kindly, always offering treats and soft hugs. One afternoon, a cousin and I dozed in her living room after lunch. We overheard her talking on the phone, her voice oddly cold. She confessed to hating our parents, calling them ungrateful leeches. She spoke of disowning them in her will, ensuring they'd never see a penny. My cousin and I lay silent, hearts pounding. We had assumed she adored our parents as she adored us. But her voice dripped venom, planning a future where she died leaving them nothing but scorn. She ended the call with a sweet tone, like flipping a switch. We never told our parents. Over time, we watched as our grandmother wore her gentle mask, praising everyone with a gentle smile. Meanwhile, we harbored the secret that behind closed doors, she seethed with hatred. We suspected she changed her will eventually. The day she died, tensions erupted in the family. My parents ended up with almost nothing. My cousin and I said nothing about the phone conversation. The knowledge that the sweet old woman was a cunning manipulator made us question every cookie she ever gave us. User under the nickname Embersong. I spent a weekend at a friend's house. We settled on the floor with sleeping bags. In the early morning, her parents came into the living room, not realizing I was awake. They started discussing how they disliked me spending time there, worried I'd be a bad influence. They belittled my family's reputation, called me a troublemaker from a broken home. I felt tears sting my eyes, because my parents had recently divorced, but we were not trouble. They told each other they'd politely discourage future sleepovers. I lay there, cheeks flushing with shame. I realized these parents, who always greeted me with forced smiles, truly scorned me. The worst part was the next day. They acted so welcoming, offering pancakes, saying I was always welcome. That hypocrisy cut deep. They never banned me outright. Instead, they found excuses to keep me away. My friend never knew why we drifted. I never told her I overheard her parents calling me a worthless child. The lesson burned into me. Sometimes the warmest faces hide the cruelest judgments. Whispered in midnight hush. User under the nickname Evening Trace. I stayed at my boyfriend's place, a small studio apartment. He had a friend crash on the couch. Late that night, the friend thought I was asleep. My boyfriend stepped out, leaving the friend alone. The friend made a phone call, describing how he planned to trick my boyfriend into signing some shady contract. He cackled that he would rope my boyfriend into debt, then profit from it. He spoke with a mocking sneer, calling my boyfriend gullible, too busy chasing his petty dreams to notice the trap. I was furious, but I stayed silent. My boyfriend eventually returned, and the conversation ended. The next morning, the friend acted buddy-buddy, praising my boyfriend. My fists clenched. I privately told my boyfriend something felt off about that friend. He brushed it aside until weeks later, when financial trouble arose. That friend tried to coax him into signing an impossible loan. My boyfriend hesitated, recalling my warning. He refused. The friend lashed out, revealing his twisted intentions. That fiasco ended their friendship. I never confessed that I gleaned everything from overhearing a late-night phone call while feigning sleep. But sometimes you do what you must to protect those you care about, even if it means harboring secrets from that silent vantage. User under the nickname Crimson Dawn. When I was about 8, my father took me on a camping trip with 2 of his buddies. We shared a large tent. Late at night, I pretended to be asleep, eyes closed, while they chatted, presumably thinking I was too young to understand or fully awake. One friend started recounting a horrifying tale of how he once got away with manslaughter. My father urged him to hush, but he kept going, bragging about how some bar fight escalated, how he beat a man who later died from injuries, and how he used a false alibi to avoid charges. I lay there, heart pounding in the chilly night air, realizing this friendly uncle figure was capable of grave violence. My father did not condone it, but he did not turn him in either. That hush felt like a betrayal of justice. I recall trembling under my sleeping bag. From that day, I feared his friend's presence, dreaded any family gathering involving him. My father told me not to worry, that sometimes people embellish stories. But I saw the tension in his eyes, as if he knew it was real. Faking sleep that night stripped away my naive trust in adults, unveiling a hidden monster behind a genial smile.